Hi everyone, I'm Lon Litz here, the CEO of October Health. It's our first podcast under our new brand. I'm really excited to be back, really excited to be here with our new focus on performance psychology. We're here still Pressure Point with the seasoned HR executive Lebitso Mokgatle, and we're here to chat about how you can balance, which not an easy thing to do, a high-performing culture, which you know everything about, with a culture of care. And I think there's so much more that we'll unpack in between and everything on either side of that. But before we get into that, let's start up with a bit of your background.
Thank you. So I've been in HR for over 20 years, started off as an HR trainee and worked my way through the ranks. I've mainly worked in financial services and professional services, which tend to be super pressurized, super high performance environment. And now working for ENS as their head of HR, which is also a very pressurized high performance environment. Yeah.
Awesome. So I think let's maybe start with a key point, which is how do you build credibility as HR, right? Because it was something we were discussing earlier, and I think if you're going to be impactful in your role, right, you need to have credibility both with employees but also with leadership within an organization. And to achieve what is probably one of the hardest things that HR need to achieve, that balance, you have to have that credibility. So how, are there tips?
100%. So I firmly believe that if, as an HR person, you're speaking to the business in HR jargon, you're going to lose them from the beginning of your sentence. You need to talk to them with business speak. You need to actually get yourself understanding the business, understand what are the business levers that lead to profitability, and what does that mean in terms of the people in the organization? What are the levers you need to pull as HR to support the business to achieve what their business goals are? And we read about it a lot in HR journals and articles, but very few HR people actually take the time to truly understand what makes this business tick, what are the things that are keeping the business leaders up at night. And we generally just come in and start talking about people and hiring and firing and performance, but actually we're not talking to them in a way that makes them realize, okay, you actually understand what I'm trying to achieve here and why the people in my team and how it's structured and that they're well, why that is important. And that's been number one for me. Since I started, I was lucky that I did a postgrad diploma in management at Wits Business School. And the first semester was just business courses, and then the second semester was HR. So they drummed it into us that first understand the business, then your specialization, which was for me, HR. So I've just always gone to the workplace with that kind of mindset.
And I think that's so incredibly important. And I think we've spoken a lot in this podcast about ensuring that everyone in the organization understands how their role fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And HR is no different. I think
100%.
It's easy to maybe overlook that and just be focused on what are those people objectives, but how do those people objectives feed into the broader organizational goals?
100%, yeah. I think if people don't know how their role fits into the overall business, it's easy for you to make a mistake and think it's not that important, or think you're fixing it when you're making it worse, or be quite lackadaisical about your role because you think, well, all I'm doing is processing invoices. But you're not thinking about what came before and what comes after you've processed that invoice, and why it's important that invoice is properly put together, it's got all the right information, that there's no comebacks. But people don't necessarily get to understand that. They're just processing, right? Yeah. And then you don't feel like you're actually adding value because I'm just a paper pusher. But if you actually have a sense of why this job that I do is important, then you tend to think, okay, I'm actually doing something important. And even though right now I'm processing invoices, I could go to the next step, right? Then you start thinking broader career rather than just my little job here. And it's an important part of performance management and performance, driving performance, is actually people understanding why what they do is part of a value chain. Yeah. It's not just a standalone.
Yeah, and a critical element, right? If those invoices in your example are not processed, then the system doesn't work in the way that it should, right? So everyone's role is critical to the overall success of the organization. And I think it's important to drum that point home for the entire team.
100%.
So maybe to start with, what is a high-performing culture? Right? Like, let's maybe start there. Like, what does that look like? I mean, you've been in the engine room of some of the highest performing organizations in the country.
Yeah.
And maybe what are some of the ingredients that make those businesses tick or give them an edge over their competitors?
So I think, the culture is so key. And in every one of the organizations I've worked for, the cultures are so different, right? But there's this high performance that's driving the business, and how each business chooses to implement that high performance culture is slightly different. So some organizations I've worked for are very much about the balance, are very much about you must bring your full self to work. We want to get to know you as an individual, and you must have fun here. We want you, as much as we're high performance, it's a fun place to work, right? And then there's other organizations where it's just we're high performance and we're very serious about what we do. And the people who work here, it's all about pushing ourselves, and we love pushing ourselves. We want to be like exceptionally exhausted, and we walk around feeling like, oh, we can't do this anymore. Then we wake up and we come back and do it. And it's all about resilience and coming back. So ENS is very much that resilience, and it's so hard, but we love it being so hard, and we keep going, and we're so proud that, we pulled our all-nighter for like 3 days in a row, which is so unhealthy. But then we have those kind of people, right?
Yeah.
You just love that. And then how do you, in that high performance culture, find the balance where, as I said, you're still enjoying it, right? As hard as it is, you still actually want to come back the next day. You still want to keep pushing. You still want to achieve. You don't feel like it's becoming a burden. And I think that's the biggest challenge. I've struggled with it, like just balancing that. I love it and I want to keep going, but how do I make sure that I don't deplete the resources, be they physical or mental, right? And that's the big challenge.
So there's a lot there. So I think maybe let's unpack it. I think, maybe the starting point is what sounds like a commonality is that people love it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not easy, right? To get employees to love what they do.
Yeah.
So what is it you think about a culture, about an organization, something that maybe leaders listening can take back to their own businesses to get that buy-in from employees? And I think we touched on a bit of it around alignment and, kind of feeling that your role has an important impact on the overall goals of the organization. What else can you do to ensure that?
So I think people need to feel that it's not just about, I'm not just here because of what I deliver in the job. You actually value me as a human being and my full self. So I found as a leader, I get to know my team members very well. So, and I do regular catch-ups with the people, with my direct reports, and a lot of it, you'll find the first sometimes 30 minutes of a 1 hour catch-up is just updates on what's happening in their personal lives, and you get to know them as an individual. And once you get to know people as human beings, not as people who deliver work, and you relate to them in that very personalized way, they also feel like, okay, she values me more than what I actually deliver. She values me more than the work I do. She actually knows me as a human being. And then as a leader, you then realize what are the things I need to do to help this person do better, which is different to what I do to the third person. And you actually need to model your leadership around what your individual team member needs, which I think is one of the most complex aspects of leadership. It's something that we all struggle with because we all have a personal style and a personality, and that's constant, right? To then try and manage your own leadership style to get the best out of different people, which is actually what HR is, if you think about it, because you're trying to get the best out of, let's say, 1,000 people, but all those 1,000 people have different engagement levers, have different passions, have different things that gets them excited, have different reasons why they joined your organization in the first place, right? And how do you pull all the different levers to keep 1,000 people constantly engaged? It's one of the most difficult things, and I think post-COVID, one of the toughest things for us in HR is that it's become so much more individualized. So our whole thing in HR is it's group benefits. Everyone gets the same thing. We're all on the same medical aid. You all get the same provident fund. You all get the same car policy. And everyone's saying, but that doesn't work for me. And people are more individualized, and it needs to be, all the time we've said, this is who we are, and this is what we have, and this is great, right? Telling them what we have and telling them it's great. What we actually need to do, and I heard this last year at a conference, and it was such a mind shift. They said to us, think about your job and how you would sell it. What are the things you would sell about your job, and what are the things that make your job like great for someone else? And that's actually quite a difficult thing to do, right? So what are the things you would want to know? And it's that individualization post-COVID, and that's really, I think, organizations and very much HR we're really struggling with, because I like working from home. Why must I come in 3 times a week? Like, I don't need to. I can get the work done. Why must I come in 5 days a week? Why must I come in at all? And everyone's wanting a different way, and we're all used to this homogenous organization that same policies for everyone, and it's a challenge. And it's not that how I sell a job to you is the same to how I sell it to someone else, right? And we need to figure out, what are we actually selling here? It's actually a sell.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, again, it's about balance, right? Because in some ways you can't overcorrect and individualize everything within the organization, because then from just a complexity perspective, it's going to be
100%.
Impossible to keep track of, the different rules, and you can't have different rules for different people. But there are aspects where, like anything, you can compromise in certain areas. You can adapt your style to different employees. I think that human connection point is a great point as well, which I think so many managers just forget about, right? Mm-hmm. They get into that one-on-one, and it's straight into a list of deliverables, right? Yeah. Here are the 10 things that we spoke about last week.
Where are we?
not how are you as a starting point. And
exactly.
I think different people, again, will have different levels of relationship with their kind of co-workers, but just take a bit of time to check in. I think that's important. 100%. And again, some people may want to open up in ways others don't, and that's okay.
100%. Yeah.
There's a lot more that I still want to touch on, but I think probably one of the most important ingredients of this high-performing culture is people. And there's an element of what you do when people are in the organization, and I definitely want to touch on that, and you've already shared a lot on that.
Yeah.
But before they even enter the organization, you've got to hire the right type of people, because that type of environment is probably not the environment for everyone. So how do you go about that hiring process? How do you know what traits to hire for? How do you prepare people as well? So I think part of the problem as well is people come in and there's a gap between what they were sold and what they experienced day to day.
I think one of the things you need to be is honest about what your culture is. Don't pretend people are going to work from 8 to 5 and they're not going to work after hours and they're not going to work on weekends, and make it seem cuter and prettier than it actually is. I think you actually need to be honest with people of what we believe a standard day is, and don't sugarcoat it. I think that's the worst thing you can try and do, is try and attract someone with what you think they want to hear rather than what the reality is. So that's number one. And you can act, it's so weird. You can actually see it even in the interview if you're being real about the culture, where they're looking at where am I? This is, and you can tell from the kind of questions people ask if are they saying it because they think that's what you want to hear. And sometimes you get fooled. People are good at telling you what they think you want to hear. But honesty is important. Obviously, the type of questions you're asking in the interview, one of the questions I like to ask people is, there's a reason you chose to go into this career, that there's something you hoped to achieve. How will you know once you achieve that? What will that look like? And when they tell you that story, it tells you, if they're going to tell you about being the subject matter expert, being the person then they're high performing. If they're telling you about, I'll know I've made it when I can take 3-month holidays and sit on the beach, and there's a mindset that's that's different, right? So that there are ways to ask it that aren't the typical questions, but are still questions you can ask in an interview, just about how people think about work and life, and also understanding what people do when they're not working, right? So if you ask someone, what do you do when you want to have fun? That's one of the easiest ways to ask it, right? And then they tell you what they do when they want to have fun. It gives you a sense that this person's got a balanced life, that there's something else outside of work, because that's also important. You don't want someone who says, actually, I'm all about the work, and you're thinking, that can't be. Firstly, it's not healthy. Secondly, are you just telling me that because you think that's what I want to hear? I actually want to hear that you do have an outlet, right? And you do have things you do that are stress relievers, that are fun for you, that you enjoy doing, whatever it may be, right? So it's you need to engage people on stuff that's not just about the job that they're interviewing for. One of the things that I always try, because I work with a lot of lawyers, and often instead of interviewing, they get into interrogating, because that's how they're trained, right?
It's a job.
It's their job, right? And to train interviewers that actually you get the best out of people when they're relaxed. When people are relaxed and calm, they tell you so much more about themselves, so much more about who they really are and what they really think. And they'll probably leave the interview thinking, oh, how did I say that? And whereas if they're tense and they're feeling uncomfortable, they're not telling you much. They're giving you very robotic answers. So it's very important. I always say to, especially students, I say, don't worry, you're meeting the nicest people in the organization. None of us are lawyers. It's great, right? Just chill, relax, and enjoy. And that's, it's important that people are actually relaxed, and then you actually get the most.
It's amazing how that context would just change the perception going into the interview. I think maybe a separate point or something altogether, but that context setting, like your assumption going into discussion, can just change the outcome of that discussion. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I think it's a great point and a great tip for people generally, just about how you approach problems, how you approach challenges. But I do want to touch on a point that you made around kind of how you recharge, let's call it that, because you spoke to a very demanding culture. You spoke to an environment that asks a lot. And at the end of the day, you can kind of push hard, but you're going to need, like, at some point to recharge, right? And take some time for yourself. So how do you ensure that, especially in this environment where you kind of push hard, you know, you pull your all-nighters to get something out for a client, and then maybe there's pressure to do that again, but how do you get people to take that step back or do things for themselves to make sure that they are kind of filling up their cup, using that example, versus running on empty and ultimately landing in a place which is very difficult to come back from?
I think it's complex. I think when you're at my level of seniority, it's in inverted commas easier. Well, it's not really, but it's easier because you are more the master of your destiny in terms of what your day looks like, how you're going to manage your time. Whereas when you're a team member, you are reliant on your team leader to give you the work, and then you just must deliver, right? I think when you're a leader, it's your responsibility to be aware of what's happening in your team. So I often say, like, some of our directors will be like, my team, we've been working every weekend for the past 4 weeks, and I don't know how to. I said, but why don't you just give them Friday off? Oh, no, I didn't know I could do that. But it says, don't I need permission? I said, permission from whom? But people, I don't think managers also think about it. Like, you as a leader, you need to anticipate. So if they've been working 4 weeks straight every single week, which does happen, right? Or they've pulled an all-nighter Thursday and Friday night, say to them, don't come in on Monday. Obviously, if you can, right? But they're levers as a leader that we can use, where you actually don't need to call HR and say, just give it to them, right? It's not a day's leave. They appreciate it because, wow, okay, you actually realize that I've actually worked really, really, really hard, right? Because people who tend to flourish in high-performing organizations aren't going to ask for the time. So you need to be a leader who is aware of how much you're pushing your team, and that you need to then be the person who allows them that day. And even if you don't give all of them the day, because we have a business, but you give them some of them at a time, right? I think that's important as a leader to be aware that because as normal employees, you don't necessarily have the power to give it to yourself, and you need a leader who's going to give you that space to allow you to do it. But the ability to figure out what it is that recharges your batteries. As much as I'm talking right now, I'm a huge introvert. So, you would never, you never know. That's because you and I do one-on-one. I'm great one-on-one. Put me in a crowd of people I don't know. It's the worst thing. It's my absolute worst, right? And I've realized that there's some weekends I don't leave my house. I arrive on Friday and I leave on Monday, and I've not spoken to a soul. Because the job I have is very emotionally taxing and a lot of people interaction all the time, every day. Yeah. And you're exhausted by the end of it. You're just completely depleted. Where some people, and I've got friends like this who just want more people. And for me, it's sometimes the worst thing, right? And to be okay with being able to say, actually, I need me time, whatever that me time is. And figuring out what that thing is that actually refills the tank, because it does get depleted, and you actually need to maintain it rather than waiting for it to be completely empty. And then at that point, to refill it is going to take you so much longer than if you're regularly doing it. And even if it's even on a daily basis, if you come home. If you like, one of the things I do, and not that often, but one of the things I love to do is have a cup of tea. You get home, and just the ritual, and I love the tea leaves, not the tea bags, the ritual of
old school
making the cup of tea in the teapots, and that whole thing, because your body and your mind kind of registered, okay, we're now coming down, and just that already brings you. And I've got friends who, when they get on the bike, when they get home, that's their mind and body telling them, okay, there needs to be some sort of fundamental shift from leaving the office.
Decompression.
It literally needs. And I think if you remember during lockdown, we didn't have that. Yeah. We didn't have get in your car, drive home, and that tells your mind you've stopped the official working day. We just kept going. And maybe we moved from one room to another, but we actually there was nothing that told your mind it's now time. So that's why the mental health issues were so much higher. Yeah. Because people just kept going and going and going. We actually had one of our associates say to me, so I can hear the sound of that Teams ring in my sleep. Exactly. That's when you know there's a problem, right? That's what
too many meetings.
Exactly. Too many online meetings. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So there's a lot there. I think like the first piece is probably the importance of recognition, right? Like, push hard, achieve a milestone, celebrate it in a small way, and give your team an opportunity to just recharge, right? And pause at that point. And it doesn't have to be an elaborate thing.
100%.
But it needs to be acknowledged, and the time needs to be given, and it needs to be okay to give that time. I think another piece is just the importance of communication, right? Because we're not communicating with each other, and everyone's saying, I'm perfectly fine. And when you do that check-in and you say, I'm perfectly fine, then the assumption's going to be you're perfectly fine,
100%.
right? And I think it's a balance again, right? We can't overcorrect in situations. We need to, not take advantage of things. We need to be honest about those things. But when people do need that time, it's okay to say, listen, I pushed for 3 nights. Can I come in a bit late, or can I take the half day? And I think it's okay to communicate, and that comes down to trust
100%.
As well, which is really important for organizations. I think that's a great example of how organizations can show they care, right, and still demand or achieve high performance. What are some other ways or other kind of initiatives that you have in place where you can get this balance, show that you are a culture that cares, but a culture that is a high performing one?
So we one of the things that we've done quite well is we celebrate firm milestones. So I remember we had two of our offices, Mauritius and our Namibian office. Mauritius was 200 years old, and then Namibia was 100 years old. So the original firms. And then we found a way to celebrate those milestones across the firm. And what we did, each office, different times, would do community work. So we choose a project. I know one of the ones we did in the Joburg office was cleaning up the Braamfontein Spruit. And we were all there on a Saturday morning and cleaning up. And then in Rwanda, they did something that was important for them in Rwanda. In Windhoek, everyone did something, and we'd showcase it across the firm. So it shows that actually, when we talk about giving back, there are ways to do things that actually giving back makes you feel good, right? And when you do it with colleagues, and it's a team building, and you also feel like you work for an organization that cares about the communities it's in, the environment, etc., then you actually, there's an affiliation. And I think organizations underestimate how much employees and people who are looking at your brand want to know about what you do in your communities, because they want to be able to give back, and they want to know. We have two pro bono offices, one in Alex and one in Mitchell's Plain, which are full-time ENS officers.
Wow, okay.
They're fully staffed ENS officers, which provide legal services to people living in Alex and people living in Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha. And our lawyers, so they're lawyers who work there full-time, and then our lawyers in Cape Town and Joburg and Stellenbosch have pro bono hours that they have to work. They have pro bono days where they go and they sit in the Alex or Mitchell's Plain office and actually see clients around whatever legal issue they have. And so many people ask us, can I just work in pro bono? They apply to us can I only do the pro bono work, right? And we've had to explain to some of our candidate attorneys that you actually need to work and build clients so that we can do the work we do at pro bono. One doesn't happen without the other. Right? It's a balance, right? We are able to do what we do in our pro bono offices because we have lawyers who are billing big corporate clients who are able to pay the fees so that we can actually also give time and money to the communities in which we operate. And I always think that I know a lot of organizations just do it quietly, and we're one of those. We don't. It's unlikely even to see it very prominently anywhere, but we do it. But people actually want to know that organizations do that. Yeah. It says something about the soul of organization. It says you care. It says you want to be in the community. It's also such a team building exercise for an organization when you do those kind of charity or community work. I remember many years ago I worked for Deutsche, and we used to build the house, and we literally went and the cement Habitat for Humanity, and that was one of the things we would do as a group of Deutsche people, and to be across different teams. But it was a great way, firstly, to do something completely different with the traders.
People let their head down a bit.
100%, right?
In a positive way, right?
In a very positive way. So I do think as organizations we underestimate how we do it, but we underestimate how much that creates an affiliation to a brand, and also is a great team building opportunity when you give back to the communities.
Yeah, that's awesome. So maybe just completely off topic, but I want to raise it because I think there'll be a lot of relevance to listeners. Is ENS, how many offices across the continent?
We are in 7 countries.
7 countries, okay.
Yeah, we're in 7 countries.
I mean, that's super diverse, right? Like
super diverse.
So how do you build that cohesion across? I mean, South Africa itself is diverse. Now you got 6 other countries.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the firms kind of were firms before they became part of a group. And how do you build that cohesion from a culture perspective? Because why I'm asking it is because I think it does play relevance in consistency in culture. You know, whether you're in your Cape Town office or your Nairobi office, you should feel, something about that environment that as much as it's different, it's 100%. The same. And how do you keep them aligned and kind of build that cohesion?
So one of the best ways I think we've done it, if you walk into the ENS office in Johannesburg and then you walk into Nairobi, you feel like you're at ENS.
Okay, well,
They're just certain artifacts. Yeah, there's just no doubt you're at ENS. There's certain elements of the decor which just says, if you're familiar with ENS offices, you'll know I'm at ENS without even seeing the yellow. So that's number one, that even when we are on Teams calls with each other, our offices look very similar on the Teams calls.
So it's a practical thing.
It's a very practical thing and very simple, right? Okay. But automatically we all know we're ENS. So that's a simple one. But then our philosophy is one firm, one team, one vision. That's the one thing we drum in, that we are one firm, one team, one vision. And it's easy to put like the logo and the practical stuff, but then how do you do it from a culture point of view? And that takes time, because what I've learned is you can't go into a country and just say, this is how we do it at ENS and now you're going to do it. First, understand what they've been doing, why that was working for them, and then how do you take what ENS does and make it fit ENS Rwanda, right? Which is a smaller country, firstly, and a smaller office, but how do they still take the ENS policies, philosophies, and make them Rwandan, right? So the Rwandese still feel that I'm not...
You're not told what to do.
Exactly, and that's such a tight balancing act. We don't always get it right, but it's a very... If people feel that you're there to work with them, to find something that works for everyone, it's far better than just coming in and saying, you will. That you will just never work, right? You actually need to figure out. So I've spent a lot of time in our other offices trying to understand what makes sense for them, culture. I mean, there's also language. Mauritius, they speak mainly French and Creole. So there's also the language stuff that's different. And then Rwanda is also the French and that. So you need to, each one is like a balancing act. And then it's about recognizing the diversity. So recognize that it is diverse already. So be aware of the diversity, and then work with the diversity and use it to enhance and enrich. I mean, South Africa's got a very specific transformation around race and gender issues, and then every country's got their own levers, and then you need to figure out what that is in that country and make it make sense. Because every country's got its thing, right? Can't just transplant it. And then it's about being sensitive. I remember when we first started our African journey, as I call it, a lot of South Africans would say, oh, so you were in Africa. And I remember one of our Ghanaian colleagues saying, are we not in Africa now? It's like, we're in South Africa. South Africa's part of Africa. Yeah. And I remember explaining it because they asked me, so why do South Africans like saying, oh, I'm going into Africa, you were... I said, because we were so closed off. We actually weren't part of Africa. During apartheid, our mindset was a closed country. We weren't part of the rest of the continent. We were ostracized by the rest. So we do have this separatist image of ourselves. And as much as now we're very much part of the continent and we actually want to be very African, there's still, for people who don't engage with people outside South Africa, the mentality is we are very separate, when actually we're not that separate. There's a lot of commonalities on the continent that actually bind us together as human beings. Forget whether you're Rwandan or Kenyan or Ghanaian. It's just the human factor. If you focus on that, you'll win every time.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think it's maybe a point worth closing on. I think just that kind of remembering people are human, right?
Yeah.
Focusing when it comes to maybe closing up this point around diverse offices, multiple locations, remembering that there should be commonality, but allowing for that local nuance. A balancing act, which I think was, if there's one theme from today, it's about balance, right? It's a tightrope. You don't always get it right. Right? You're probably going to try hard and sometimes overstep in either direction. But it's important that you look at what works, iterate, and then, do more of what works, do less of what didn't work. And keep on trying and investing in it. And then ultimately it comes down to a foundation of trust, right? And again, that's critical. Like if your people trust you, then they'll kind of be bought into that mission, right? they'll see where their role impacts the broader organization, and they'll be willing to put in the hours because they also know that they're going to be recognized at the end of the day. So I think so much there that, leaders can take back to their business and implement. So thank you. I think it was a really great conversation. The time flew by. And thanks very much to everyone for listening, and we look forward to you joining us again.